In the darkness of the Tarkis night, Alexander Coleman crept through the thick alien undergrowth, silently stalking his Tarkalian prey, about to show them why humans were the ultimate forest ghost. Alexander was the best scout Earth had, hand-picked for this solo recon mission deep in enemy territory. The fate of humanity rested on his shoulders. If he failed to uncover the Tarkalians' invasion plans, Earth would be caught off guard and decimated. Tarkis was perfect for a stealth op. The dense woods scrambled sensors, allowing Alexander to infiltrate undetected. He'd spent weeks trekking through this disorienting alien forest, evading Tarkalian patrols, surviving hungry predators, all to reach the remote enemy base. Now hidden in the shadows at the perimeter, Alexander made a chilling discovery. The Tarkalians were preparing a massive fleet to attack Earth. He had to get this intel back home. But as he moved to transmit, a cold voice cut the night. "Did you really think you could sneak onto my world without me knowing, human?" Izar, the most ruthless Tarkalian commander, stepped from the trees, weapon trained on Alexander. Izar was brilliant, lethal, and fanatically committed to his species' supremacy. To him, humans were vermin to be exterminated. Energy beams tore past Alexander as an entire platoon of Tarkalian soldiers emerged, forcing him to flee into the forest. Outnumbered and outgunned, Alexander knew his only chance was to disappear like a ghost in these woods. So began a deadly game of cat and mouse, Alexander versus Izar, human versus Tarkalian, the forest itself the battleground, as Alexander raced to escape with the secret that could save Earth, while Izar pursued, determined to bury that secret forever, no matter the cost. As Alexander races through the twisted underbrush, he spots something strange in the distance, a cluster of low angular structures that seem out of place amidst the towering alien trees. He changes course, curiosity overriding caution. The buildings are clearly Tarkalian in design, but hidden deep within the forest far from the main base. Alexander creeps closer, senses on high alert. He peers through a grimy window and his blood runs cold. Inside, rows of containment tanks hold nightmarish creatures, pulsating masses of sickly flesh, overflowing with spines and dripping with viscous fluids. Tarkalian scientists in protective gear move among them, taking samples and jotting notes on holographic pads. Alexander's mind races. These must be the bioweapons Intel had whispered about, genetically engineered monstrosities designed to turn humans into twisted abominations. With these horrors, the Tarkalians could bring Earth to its knees. A branch snaps behind him. Alexander whirls, rifle ready, but it's just a forest animal skittering away. The creatures here are growing restless. He can feel their agitation, like an electric charge in the air, taste their aggression on the breeze. Izar's forces must be close. Alexander is torn. Every instinct screams at him to run, to vanish into the undergrowth, and not look back until he reaches his extraction point. But he knows he can't let these bioweapons see the light of day. It's now or never. He hastily rigs a line of det packs along the facility's perimeter, fingers flying over the charge's interfaces as he arms them. Just as he's finishing, the door hisses open. "Going somewhere, human." Commander Zoran steps out, flanked by a phalanx of elite Tarkalian soldiers. Zoran is Izar's right hand, a stone-cold killer known for his cruelty. He levels his disruptor at Alexander's chest. "You've led us on quite the chase, but it ends here." Alexander doesn't waste breath on banter. He dives to the side as Zoran fires, superheated plasma scorching the air where he stood a heartbeat before. The Tarkalians fan out, trying to flank him, but Alexander is already moving. He snaps off 2 quick shots from his rifle, dropping the closest soldiers, then closes the distance to Zoran in a flying tackle. They hit the ground hard, grappling for control of Zoran's weapon. Zoran is strong, but Alexander is fueled by desperation. He wrenches the disruptor from the Tarkalian's grip and brings the stock down hard on Zoran's skull with a sickening crunch. The commander goes limp. Alexander staggers to his feet, wounded and winded. He slams his fist down on the detonator's trigger, and runs as the jetpacks explode in a cascade of fire and shrapnel. The bioweapon labs vanish in a roiling fireball that lights up the night like a small sun. In the distance, Izar howls with rage as he watches his dreams of conquest go up in flames. He barks orders, and his forces boil out of the jungle, closing in on the fleeing human with murderous intent. Alexander crashes through the whipping vines and grasping thorns, breath sobbing in his throat as he pushes himself to the limits of human endurance. He has to reach the ancient ruins he saw from orbit, ruined structures glimpsed through the jungle canopy that might buy him a few more minutes. Behind him, Tarkalian war cries echo through the night. Izar and Keylor, the relentless leader of Tarkalian special forces, are on his trail and out for blood. Alexander has hurt them, undermined their invasion, and they won't stop until they have his head. But the ruins are close now. Crumbling stone spires rise from the forest floor, choked with vines and stained with dark growth. They have a strange aura, an eerie feeling of ancientness and dread that raises the hairs on Alexander's neck. Beggars can't be choosers. He sprints into the twisting complex of tunnels and chambers, the shouts of the Tarkalians not far behind. The very stone seems to thrum with alien energies, eldritch powers from a forgotten time before human and Tarkalian ever dreamed of the stars. Alexander knows his luck's about to run out, but he'll be damned if he goes down without a fight. He finds a choke point, some cover, makes his stand, and prays Earth is ready for what's coming. Alexander plunged deeper into the twisting complex, heart pounding. The alien energies thrumming through the stone grew stronger, setting his teeth on edge. He rounded a corner and froze. A group of Tarkalians stood before him, weapons raised, but these weren't Izar's troops. Their armor was mismatched, cobbled together from scavenged parts. The leader, a scarred warrior with fierce eyes, stepped forward. Alexander's mind raced. He lowered his rifle slowly. "I'm Alexander. I'm here to stop Izar's invasion of Earth." The Tarkalian's eyes widened. He barked an order and his companions lowered their weapons. "I am Zoran. We too fight against Izar's tyranny. These ruins are sacred to us." Over the next hours, huddled in the ancient chambers, Alexander and Zoran exchanged information. The human described Earth's vulnerability, while Zoran revealed the rebels' desperate struggle against Izar's regime. "These ruins hold great power," Zoran explained. "Power Izar fears. If we could harness it—" A rebel technician interrupted, gesturing excitedly at a massive device covered in strange glyphs. "Commander, we've made a breakthrough." Alexander examined the alien technology. "This looks like some kind of communication array." Zoran nodded. "If we can activate it, we might warn your people." But there was no time to celebrate. A rebel scout burst in. "Izar's forces approach. They've found us." Alexander and Zoran locked eyes. An unspoken agreement passed between them. They would stand together. The next hours were a frenzy of activity. Alexander helped the rebels fortify the ruins, setting traps and creating choke points. His experience as a scout proved invaluable as they used the alien forest to their advantage. The technicians worked frantically on the communication device, while Alexander and Zoran planned their defense. As night fell, the sounds of Izar's approaching army filled the air. The battle erupted in chaos. Izar's troops swarmed the ruins, but the defenders used every trick at their disposal. Alexander's rifle barked again and again as he picked off soldiers attempting to breach their position. Zoran fought like a demon, his energy blade carving through armor and flesh, but for every enemy that fell, more took their place. In the heart of the ruins, Alexander finally activated the alien device. It hummed to life, but the power quickly faded. "It's not enough," he shouted to Zoran over the din of battle. "We need more energy." Zoran's face was grim. "There is a way. Deep in the forest lies a crystal of immense power, but retrieving it—" Alexander understood. It was suicide, but what choice did they have? As the battle raged, Alexander gathered a small team of rebels. They slipped away into the depths of the alien forest, leaving Zoran to hold the line. The jungle was a nightmare. Twisted vegetation tore at their flesh. Unseen predators stalked them in the darkness. But Alexander pushed on, driven by desperation. They found the crystal in a pool of bioluminescent liquid, guarded by monstrous creatures. The fight was brutal, leaving half the team dead or wounded, but they secured their prize. Stumbling back to the ruins, they found carnage. Bodies littered the ground. The few remaining rebels fought with the fury of the doomed. Alexander and Zoran reunited at the alien device. No words were needed. They knew what had to be done. The crystal pulsed with unearthly light as they connected it. Energy surged through the ruins. Alexander input the coordinates for Earth, praying it would be enough. The message sent, but the power unleashed was beyond anything they'd imagined. The very fabric of reality seemed to tear. The ruins began to collapse. The forest itself writhed in agony. Alexander lost sight of Zoran in the chaos. Stumbling through the maelstrom, Alexander spotted a Tarkalian shuttle. He dragged himself inside, barely conscious. As the ship lifted off, he caught a final glimpse of the destruction below. The fate of Zoran, the rebels, and Izar's forces was lost in the cataclysm that engulfed Tarkis. Alexander could only hope his warning would reach Earth in time. The stolen Tarkalian shuttle shuddered violently as Alexander fought to keep it on course. Warning lights flashed across the cockpit console, systems failing one by one. He gritted his teeth, fingers flying over the controls as he punched in a distress signal. The message sent just as the engines cut out completely. "Shit," Alexander muttered, scanning the field of asteroids looming ahead. With no power, he was on a collision course with the Zeren belt. He strapped himself in tight, bracing for impact as a massive rock filled the view screen. The shuttle slammed into the asteroid's surface, metal screeching as it tore along jagged stone. Alexander's head snapped forward, vision blurring. When the ship finally ground to a halt, he stumbled out, coughing in the acrid smoke of fried circuitry. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead as Alexander surveyed the damage. The shuttle was a wreck, its hull breached in multiple places. He grabbed what supplies he could salvage and limped toward a nearby cave entrance, each step sending pain shooting through his battered body. Inside the dark cavern, Alexander slumped against a wall and cracked open the medkit. He winced as he dabbed antiseptic on his wounds, wrapping bandages around the worst cuts. The transmitter sparked weakly when he tried to activate it. Useless. Days blurred together as Alexander rationed his dwindling supplies. He licked moisture from cave walls, choked down protein paste, and slept fitfully on cold stone. All the while, he worried about his message. Had anyone received the coordinates? Would help arrive before the encryption degraded? A faint whine pierced the silence. Alexander froze, recognizing the sound of Tarkalian scanners. He flattened himself against the tunnel wall as a ship passed overhead, praying the rock would mask his life signs. When the sound faded, Alexander sprang into action. He knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. Working feverishly, he cobbled together makeshift traps from shuttle debris and mineral deposits. Crude but effective, they might buy him precious seconds when the Tarkalians found him. The cave trembled as shuttles touched down on the asteroid's surface. Alexander's pulse quickened as he heard the clatter of armored footsteps echoing through the tunnels. He melted into the shadows, waiting. A Tarkalian soldier rounded the corner, weapon raised. Alexander triggered his trap, sending a cascade of boulders crashing down. The alien's scream was cut short as it was buried under the rockslide. More troops poured in. Alexander struck like a ghost, springing ambushes, then vanishing deeper into the maze-like caverns. He led pursuers into dead ends rigged with explosives, picking them off one by one. Rounding a bend, Alexander came face to face with a towering figure. Captain Keylor himself. The Tarkalian's eyes blazed with hatred as he lunged forward. They grappled furiously, trading vicious blows in the confined space. Alexander's ribs cracked under Keylor's inhuman strength, but desperation lent him speed, and he managed to slip free of the alien's grasp. Keylor roared in frustration, charging after his prey. Alexander scrambled backward, fumbling for the detonator in his pocket. He hit the switch just as Kalor's clawed hand closed around his throat. The tunnel collapsed in a thunderous avalanche. Alexander tumbled through the debris, landing hard as rocks rained down. When the dust settled, a wall of stone separated him from Kalor's muffled curses. Seizing his chance, Alexander sprinted for the surface. He found a Tarkalian shuttle, its engines idling as the search team regrouped. Without hesitation, he vaulted into the cockpit and fired up the launch sequence. Alarms blared as the shuttle lifted off. Energy bolts sizzled past the viewport, scoring hits on the hull. Alexander gritted his teeth as warning lights flashed. He'd escaped the asteroid, but the shuttle was crippled, unable to break orbit. A familiar vessel appeared through the debris field, Kalor's command ship. Alexander's fingers danced over the controls, jinking to avoid the onslaught of weapons fire. He couldn't outrun them, but maybe he could outmaneuver them. An idea struck as he noted the density of the asteroid field. Alexander cut power to all non-essential systems, including life support. He held his breath, guiding the dying shuttle into the thickest cluster of space rocks. Kalor took the bait, following Alexander into the treacherous maze. Their ships weaved through the asteroid fragments, trading pot shots that chipped away at their respective shields. Alexander's lungs burned for air as he lined up his final play. He fired his remaining weapons into a massive asteroid, fracturing its surface. As Kalor's ship closed in for the kill, the rock exploded into a lethal cloud of debris. The shockwave slammed both vessels, tearing them apart. Alexander felt a moment of crushing pressure as his ship decompressed. Then he was tumbling through the void, the infinite blackness of space swallowing him whole. His oxygen depleted, consciousness slipping away, Alexander's last thoughts were of Earth. He prayed his sacrifice would give them a fighting chance against the coming storm. Suddenly, a brilliant light cut through the darkness. Alexander blinked in confusion as he was enveloped in a shimmering energy field. A massive Earth warship loomed above, tractor beam locked onto his drifting form. As the medical team swarmed around him in the docking bay, Alexander managed a weak smile. He'd done it. He'd survived. And now Earth would be ready to face the Tarkalian threat. In the days that followed, Alexander was lauded as a hero. His intelligence on the Tarkalian invasion plans proved invaluable as Earth marshaled its defenses. But even as he briefed military leaders and helped coordinate strategy, his thoughts kept drifting back to Tarkus. What had become of Zoran and the rebels? Had any of them survived the cataclysm? The questions gnawed at Alexander, coloring his triumph with shades of guilt and uncertainty. He knew the war was nowhere near the end, and its cost had only begun to be tallied. Alexander's boots sank into the muddy forest floor as he led his team through the dense undergrowth of Tarkus. The air hummed with an eerie energy, remnants of the cataclysm that had nearly claimed his life. He pushed aside a glowing fern, revealing a massive crater stretching as far as the eye could see. "Holy shit," muttered Sergeant Torres, her eyes wide. "What the hell happened here?" Alexander's eyes hardened. "This is where we activated the device, where I last saw Zoran." The team's sensors crackled and died as they approached the crater's edge. An invisible barrier of energy rippled before them, distorting the air like heat waves over asphalt. "All right, masks on," Alexander ordered. "We don't know what kind of radiation we're dealing with." They descended into the crater, picking their way through twisted metal and shattered stone. Strange pulsing crystals jutted from the ground, casting an otherworldly glow across the landscape. "Coleman, over here," called Lieutenant Chen. He stood before a partially collapsed entrance half hidden by debris. "Looks like it leads underground." Alexander's pulse quickened as they entered the subterranean complex. The walls were lined with ancient glyphs, now scarred and blackened. But signs of recent activity were everywhere. Makeshift barricades, discarded ration packs, and crude medical supplies. As they pressed deeper, the stench of decay and illness grew stronger. They found the first survivors huddled in a side chamber, emaciated and trembling. Their skin was mottled with strange, glowing lesions. "Please," one of them rasped, "help us." Alexander knelt beside the alien, offering water. We're here now. Where's Zoran? The survivor pointed a shaking hand down a darkened corridor. Alexander's team moved swiftly, sweeping each room until they found him. Zoran lay on a makeshift cot, his chest barely rising with each labored breath. The proud rebel leader Alexander had known was now a shell, ravaged by radiation and injury. Zoran's eyes fluttered open, recognition dawning. Alexander, you survived. As the medics worked to stabilize Zoran, Alexander's second-in-command approached. Sir, we've found something. Looks like a large group left the complex recently, led by someone named Toran. Alexander nodded grimly. We need to find them. Gather what intel you can. We move out in 10. Days blurred together as they tracked Toran's group through the treacherous Tarkesian wilderness. The forest seemed to actively resist their progress, with poisonous spores and carnivorous plants at every turn. Twice they clashed with Tarkalian patrols, barely escaping detection. Alexander's team used their advanced countermeasures to confuse the enemy's sensors, slipping away into the shadows. On the 5th day, they crested a ridge and spotted a Tarkalian encampment in the valley below. Through his binoculars, Alexander saw a group of battered rebels being herded into containment cells. That's them, he said, but where's Toran? A commotion near the center of the camp drew his attention. A tall Tarkalian officer was interrogating a bloodied rebel, Toran. All right, listen up. Alexander addressed his team and the rebels they'd gathered along the way. We've got one shot at this. Chen, take your squad and set up a distraction on the east side of the camp. Torres, you're with me. We'll go for Toran while they're busy. The plan unfolded in controlled chaos. Chen's team unleashed a barrage of sonic grenades, scrambling Tarkalian communications. Alexander and Torres used the confusion to infiltrate the camp, taking down guards with precise shots from their silenced weapons. They reached Toran just as the Tarkalian officer, Captain Boran, was about to execute him. Alexander's rifle cracked, and Boran stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. As Torres extracted the rebel leader, Alexander faced off against the wounded but still dangerous Boran. They traded blows in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle, each seeking to gain the upper hand. A thunderous roar filled the air as Tarkalian reinforcements arrived. Massive ships descended from the clouds, disgorging waves of troops. "Fall back!" Alexander yelled into his comm. "Everyone to the extraction point!" They fled into the forest, Tarkalian energy bolts sizzling past their heads. Alexander's lungs burned as he ran, half carrying a limping Toran. The sounds of pursuit grew closer with each passing second. Alexander and his team plunged deeper into the dense Tarkesian wilderness, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter, but never quite fading away. Toran stumbled, his breath ragged. Alexander caught him before he fell. "We need to rest," Torres said, her eyes scanning the alien foliage surrounding them. Alexander shook his head. "Can't stop. Boran's too close." They pressed on, the forest growing stranger with each step. Pulsing veins of blue energy snaked through tree trunks. Crystalline growths erupted from the ground, humming with an unsettling resonance. "Sir," Chen called out, gesturing to his scanner, "these energy reading, they're off the charts." Alexander frowned, studying the data. The patterns were familiar, reminiscent of the ancient device he'd encountered before. "We're onto something. Keep moving." A piercing shriek split the air. A creature burst from the underbrush, part plant, part animal, its body twisting in impossible ways. It lunged at Torres, razor-sharp vines lashing out. Alexander's rifle cracked. The mutant beast collapsed, oozing a luminescent ichor. "The forest's changing," Toran wheezed. "This area, it's forbidden, dangerous." They had no time to process the implications. Energy bolts sizzled past, scorching the twisted vegetation. Boran's vanguard had caught up. "Contact!" Chen shouted, returning fire. The air filled with weapons discharge and the acrid smell of burning foliage. Alexander dragged Toran behind the twisted trunk of a massive tree. "We can't keep this up," Alexander said. He glanced at his dwindling ammo count, then at Toran's ashen face. The rebel leader clutched a gaping wound in his side, blood seeping between his fingers. A decision crystallized. Alexander tapped his comm. "All units fall back to my position. We're changing course." "These energy readings," Alexander explained. "They might lead us somewhere safe. It's our only shot." They disengaged, using the bizarre terrain to their advantage. The Tarkalians struggled to navigate the mutated forest, their sensors scrambled by the ambient energy. Hours passed in a grueling trek. The team took turns supporting Toran, whose condition deteriorated rapidly. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them, the trees parted. Before them loomed a titanic structure, seamlessly integrated into a mountain face. Its surface rippled with a holographic camouflage, nearly invisible to the naked eye. Toran's eyes widened. "By the ancients," he whispered, "the stories were true." "What is this place?" Alexander asked. They approached cautiously. The facility's entrance bristled with dormant defense systems, energy fields, automated turrets, and more exotic devices Alexander couldn't begin to comprehend. "How do we get in?" Torres asked. Alexander studied the alien tech, his mind racing. "Chen, that EMP device we salvaged. Torres, the rebel comjammer. If we can combine them—" They worked quickly, jury-rigging a crude bypass. Alexander held his breath as he activated the cobbled-together device. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hum, the defensive grid flickered and died. The massive doors ground open, revealing a cavernous interior. Alexander led his team inside, the wounded Toran supported between two rebels. Ancient machinery stirred to life around them, holographic displays flickering with alien script. Alexander recognized fragments from his previous encounter with the civilization's tech. "Toran's fading fast," Torres reported. "We need to find medical supplies." Alexander nodded grimly. "All right, we need to get this place up and running. Maybe there's a med bay or stasis facility we can use." He approached a central console, fingers hovering over unfamiliar controls. With a deep breath, Alexander began the process of awakening the sleeping giant. Lights flared to life. Dormant systems hummed with newfound energy. For a moment, hope surged through Alexander's chest. Then alarms blared. Massive bulkheads slammed shut, sealing them inside. A holographic warning flashed, displaying a pulsing core of energy deep within the mountain. "What's happening?" Chen shouted over the cacophony. Alexander's blood ran cold as he deciphered the alien text. "We've activated more than just life support," he said. "This whole facility, it's designed to contain something powerful." Outside they heard the approaching whine of Tarkalian shuttles. Boran had found them. Alexander's mind raced, weighing impossible options. The nexus of energy beneath their feet could be the key to defeating the Tarkalians once and for all, but unleashing it might doom them all. Alexander's fingers flew across the alien console, his eyes darting between holographic readouts. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he wrestled with the facility's arcane systems. "Toran, I need those energy conversion algorithms," he called out, voice tight with tension. The rebel scientist hunched over a nearby terminal, his face ashen. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage at his side. "Almost there," Toran gasped, tapping commands with trembling hands. A thunderous boom shook the control room. Dust rained from the ceiling as Boran's forces hammered the facility's outer defenses. "Status report," Alexander barked into his comm. "They're breaking through Sector 7. Chen's voice crackled back, punctuated by weapons fire. "We can't hold them much longer." Alexander gritted his teeth. "Buy us more time, whatever it takes." He turned back to the consoles, diving deeper into the facility's systems. Alien glyphs scrolled past, each potentially holding the key to unlocking the Nexus power, or triggering a cataclysm. "I've got it," Toran wheezed, sending a stream of data to Alexander's terminal. "But the energy build-up it's beyond anything we've seen. One wrong move—" "I know," Alexander cut him off, fingers dancing across the controls. "But it's our only shot." The facility rumbled again, more violently this time. Alexander stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the console. A proximity alert flashed on the main screen. Boran's troops had breached the main entrance. "Now or never," Alexander muttered. He initiated the power-up sequence, watching as energy levels climbed to unprecedented heights. Toran slumped against his terminal, barely conscious. "The structural weak point," he rasped. "Target the northwest quadrant." Alexander nodded, adjusting the beam's trajectory. The entire room hummed with raw power as he engaged the final sequence. A blinding flash erupted from the heart of the facility. The floor bucked beneath their feet as reality itself seemed to warp and twist. Alexander grabbed Toran, half carrying him towards the exit. "All units fall back," he shouted into his comm. "We're coming out hot." They staggered through collapsing corridors, the air thick with dust and crackling energy. Ahead, Chen and Torres provided covering fire as rebel troops streamed past. "Move, move, move," Alexander yelled, practically dragging Toran along. They burst out of the facility just as a massive tremor rocked the ground. Alexander looked back to see the ancient structure implode, folding in on itself in a maelstrom of light and raw power. The shockwave hit them like a physical force, sending them sprawling. Alexander's ears rang as he struggled to his feet, hauling Toran up beside him. They scrambled for shelter, as the very fabric of Tarkis seemed to tear apart around them. The sky turned an unnatural shade of purple, streaked with veins of crackling energy. In the distance, Tarkalian ships plummeted from the sky, caught in the Nexus' unleashed fury. Alexander's team huddled in the depths of a twisting cavern system as the planet convulsed above. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the rumble of distant explosions and Toran's labored breathing. When the tremors finally subsided, Alexander ventured to the cave's mouth. The landscape before him was alien and hostile. Huge fissures scarred the earth, while pockets of warped reality shimmered in the air like heat mirages. He activated his scanner, frowning at the readings. "The Nexus energy, it's everywhere. We didn't contain it, we just scattered it." Toran coughed weakly behind him. "We bought time," the rebel scientist whispered. "But at what cost?" Alexander turned back to his battered team, his expression grim. "We finish what we started," he said, "whatever it takes." Alexander led his battered team deeper into the cavern system, the echoes of their footsteps mixing with the distant rumble of Tarkis's ongoing convulsions. The air grew thick with an acrid electric scent as they descended. "Set up the command center here," Alexander ordered, gesturing to a large chamber. "Chen, get those sensors online. We need to know what we're dealing with." As rebels rushed to comply, Alexander huddled with Toran and his core team around a makeshift holotable. Data streams flickered to life, painting a grim picture of their situation. "The Nexus energy. It's spreading exponentially," Toran said, his voice weak but urgent. "Look at these instability readings. If we don't act fast, the entire planet could tear itself apart." Alexander's eyes narrowed as he studied the holographic display. "We need answers fast. What did we pull from that facility's databanks?" A rebel technician, her face smeared with grime, stepped forward. "Sir, we've only begun to scratch the surface, but it's incredible. The civilization that built this, they weren't just advanced, they were masters of energy beyond our comprehension." "And it nearly destroyed them," Toran added, tapping commands to bring up new data. "There are references here to a great calamity. It seems they pushed too far, too fast. The Nexus forces they unleashed, they almost shattered the planet." Alexander leaned in, scanning the alien text. "How did they contain it?" "Stabilization grids," the technician replied. "Massive arrays built across the planet's surface. But many are located in regions long since abandoned." Chen's voice crackled over the comm. "Commander, you need to see this." Alexander strode to the sensor station, where a holographic map of Tarkis hovered. Pulsing red nodes dotted the surface, each representing a Nexus energy concentration. "We've identified the largest pockets," Chen explained. "Most are in uncharted territory, but a few—" He highlighted several points. "These align with old rebel outposts. There might still be functioning stabilizer tech there." Alexander's mind raced, formulating a plan. He turned to address the assembled rebels. "Listen up. We're splitting into 2 teams. Vorik, you'll lead a group to those outposts. Get those stabilizers online if you can." The grizzled rebel commander nodded grimly. "And you, sir?" "I'm taking a strike team into the wastelands," Alexander said. "We'll hit the largest Nexus pocket, see if we can neutralize it at the source." Murmurs of concern rippled through the crowd. Alexander raised a hand for silence. "I know it's risky, but if we don't act now, there won't be a Tarkis left to save." As the teams prepared to move out, a scout burst into the chamber. "Tarkalians," he gasped. "They're regrouping, pushing into the lowlands." Alexander cursed under his breath. Of course, the bastards wouldn't give up that easily. "All right, people, time's up. Move out and watch your backs. This fight's far from finished." The cavern erupted into a flurry of activity as rebels gathered weapons and supplies. Alexander checked his own gear, mind already racing ahead to the challenges that awaited them in the Nexus-warped wastelands. "Ready?" Torres asked, appearing at his side. They emerged from the caves into a landscape transformed. The familiar forests and plains of Tarkis were gone, replaced by a twisted, alien terrain. Fissures crackled with unnatural energy, while pockets of warped space shimmered in the air like heat mirages. Alexander's strike team pushed forward, their path illuminated by the eerie glow of Nexus contamination. Each step brought new dangers, sudden gravity shifts that sent them stumbling, energy flares that threatened to overload their shields. "Contact left," Chen shouted suddenly. Alexander spun, rifle raised only to freeze at the sight before him. A beast lumbered from behind a crystalline outcropping, its form a nightmarish fusion of flesh and energy. Tendrils of raw Nexus power writhed across its massive frame. "Hold fire," Alexander ordered, his voice tight. "Let's not provoke it if we don't have to." The team inched backward, weapons trained on the mutated creature. It sniffed the air, let out a low, keening wail that sent shivers down their spines, then lumbered away. "Nexus corruption," Toran replied grimly, "and I fear it's only the beginning." They pressed on, relying on sensor data and centuries-old maps to navigate the treacherous terrain. Hours passed in grueling, tense silence, broken only by the crackle of Nexus energy and the occasional distant roar of twisted fauna. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to shift. Alexander stumbled, feeling a sickening lurch in his stomach as gravity itself seemed to warp. The world twisted, folding in on itself. For a heart-stopping moment, Alexander felt himself falling through an impossible void. Then, with a bone-jarring thud, reality snapped back into place. He scrambled to his feet, checking his team. They were shaken but intact, and found themselves on a plateau overlooking a vast, shimmering expanse of raw Nexus energy. "My God," Torres breathed, "is that—" Alexander nodded grimly. "The primary Nexus pocket, we made it." As they surveyed the cosmic maelstrom before them, a distant rumble caught their attention. Alexander raised his binoculars, his blood running cold at the sight of Tarkalian dropships descending from the turbulent skies. "Looks like we've got company," he growled. "Let's move. We need to get those suppression modules deployed before they reach us." The team surged forward, racing against time and their relentless alien pursuers. The fate of Tarkis, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. Alexander's fingers flew across the alien controls, engaging the dimensional locks with practiced precision. The air crackled with energy as the Nexus rift collapsed inward, contained within a shimmering pyramid of force fields. "Containment stable," Chen called out, eyes fixed on his readouts. "We did it!" Their victory was short-lived. The sky lit up with the fiery trails of Tarkalian dropships. Izar's forces had arrived. "Incoming!" Torres shouted as the first salvo of energy blasts hammered their position. The pyramid's shields flickered and failed, leaving them exposed. Alexander grabbed his rifle, barking orders. Chen, take half the team and fortify those external stabilizers. The rest of you with me. We're going to give these bastards something to chase. They burst from cover, plasma bolts sizzling past. Alexander's group cut through the Tarkalian ground forces, exploiting gaps in their formation. A weaponized shuttle loomed ahead, its crew distracted by the chaos. They sprinted for the shuttle, laying down suppressing fire. Torres slammed the butt of her rifle into a Tarkalian's face mask, shattering it. Alexander vaulted into the cockpit, his hands dancing over unfamiliar controls. The shuttle's engines roared to life as the last of their team scrambled aboard. They blasted skyward, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Izar's flagship is taking the bait, Chen's voice crackled over the comms. They're moving to pursue. Alexander grinned savagely. Then let's give them a proper Terran welcome. The shuttle dove into Tarki's debris ring, a graveyard of shattered ships and asteroids. Alexander weaved through the obstacle course, Tarkalian capital ships lumbering in pursuit. "Weapons hot," he shouted. "Hit and fade, people. Make every shot count." They struck like lightning, plasma cannons carving gashes in Tarkalian hulls, before vanishing back into the debris field. Explosions bloomed in the void as their precision strikes found vital systems. "We're losing ground," a technician shouted over the din of battle. "The generators can't take much more." As if in answer, Tarkalian bombers screamed overhead. Their payload struck true, obliterating the backup generators in a series of thunderous explosions. In orbit, Alexander's stolen shuttle was falling apart around them. Their weapons were spent, their shields failing. Through the viewscreen, he watched Izar's fleet consolidating into a massive bombardment formation. "They're going for the Nexus site," he realized aloud. "We've got one shot at this." Alexander grabbed the controls, aiming the crippled shuttle directly at Izar's flagship. "Brace for impact." The shuttle slammed into the Tarkalian vessel at ramming speed. Metal screamed as they tore through the hull. A blinding explosion engulfed them, the shockwave rocking nearby ships. On the ground, the rebels' audacious attempt paid off. Energy surged through the overloaded stabilizers, coalescing into a titanic shield. It expanded outward from the pyramid's peak, enveloping the entire containment zone just as Izar's bombardment rained down. Hours later, Alexander regained consciousness amidst twisted wreckage. Rebel search teams pulled him free, rushing him to a makeshift command center. His body ached, but his mind raced. "The pyramid's holding, sir," a lieutenant informed him. "But we're running on fumes. We can't shut this thing down, not with what we have left." Alexander nodded, his expression hardening. He keyed his comm, broadcasting to all Allied forces. "This is Commander Coleman. All units converge on the Nexus site. We're digging in for the long haul. Use the stabilizer's power to keep that pyramid sealed. We hold until reinforcements arrive or Izar's beaten, whatever comes first." As Alexander spoke, the sky lit up with fresh barrages. Tarkalian ships clashed with the remnants of the rebel fleet high above. The conflict had escalated beyond Tarkis, drawing in forces from across the sector. Alexander stepped out of the command center, surveying the shattered landscape. Rebel troops rushed to fortify positions around the pyramid's perimeter. The air thrummed with the sound of energy weapons and distant explosions. The ground trembled beneath Alexander's feet as another volley of Tarkalian orbital fire slammed into the shield, protecting the Nexus containment pyramid. Sweat beaded on his brow as he surveyed the battered rebel defenses. The air crackled with ozone and the acrid stench of burned circuitry. Chen's voice came back, strained and exhausted. "Stabilizers at 62% capacity, sir. Shields holding, but barely. We can't take much more of this." Alexander opened his mouth to respond, when a panicked shout cut through the din of battle. He spun to see a rebel scout sprinting towards him, face pale with fear. The man skidded to a halt, gasping for breath. "Sir, we found something. A fissure just beyond the western perimeter. It's you. It's pulsing with energy like nothing I've ever seen. Alexander's blood ran cold. He grabbed a nearby datapad, pulling up the sensor feeds. There, unmistakable, a jagged line of sickly purple light spread outward from the pyramid's base. The alien scientist's eyes widened as he studied the readouts. By the ancients, it's a spatial rift. The Nexus energies, they're tearing through the very fabric of reality. How bad? Alexander demanded. Toran's voice was grim. If it reaches critical mass, the planetary core will destabilize. Tarkis will be torn apart from the inside out. Alexander's mind raced. They couldn't vent the Nexus. Izar would seize that power in an instant. But containing it was killing the planet. He made his decision. Prep the drilling rigs, he ordered. We're going to seal that rift. Within the hour, a heavily armored convoy rumbled across the blasted landscape. Alexander stood in the lead vehicle, studying tactical readouts as they approached the fissure's epicenter. Energy tendrils lashed out from the widening crack, warping the air itself. Suddenly, the sky lit up with fire. Tarkalian dropships screamed overhead, disgorging waves of battle mechs. The convoy's point defenses roared to life, filling the air with plasma bolts. They know, Alexander growled. He keyed his comm. All units, engage. We have to reach that rift. The world dissolved into chaos. Alexander's armor vibrated as nearby explosions rocked the convoy. Through the viewports, he saw rebel troops falling by the dozens, cut down by relentless Tarkalian fire. So a deafening screech tore through the air as a Tarkalian frigate swooped low, energy cannons blazing. The convoy scattered, vehicles reduced to smoking wreckage. Alexander's transport lurched violently, throwing him to the floor. He tasted blood, hauling himself up to see the driver slumped over the controls, half his body vaporized by a direct hit. With a snarl, Alexander grabbed the wheel, swerving to avoid another barrage. The rift loomed ahead, a hellish maw of cosmic energy. He floored the accelerator, plowing through Tarkalian infantry. The transport skidded to a halt at the rift's edge. Alexander leapt out, shouting orders to the handful of survivors. Get those rigs deployed, now! His remaining troops fanned out, providing covering fire as technicians scrambled to set up the drilling equipment. Alexander grabbed a rifle, joining the desperate defense. Our Tarkalian battle mech stomped forward, its massive frame overflowing with weaponry. Alexander took careful aim, his shot punching through an exposed power coupling. The mech staggered, secondary explosions tearing it apart from within. Rigs online, a technician shouted. Initiating matter-antimatter injection. A piercing whine filled the air as the drills bored into the earth. Streams of shimmering energy poured into the rift, the exotic mixture beginning to seal the spatial tear. But it was too late. A Tarkalian energy blast caught Alexander square in the chest, hurling him backwards. He landed hard, vision blurring as blood pooled beneath him. All around his comrades fell, overwhelmed by the enemy's superior numbers. Alexander dragged himself to his knees, each breath agony. Through the haze of pain he saw Tarkalian troops swarming the drilling site. In the distance, the containment pyramid's shields flickered and died. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.